This podcast is proud to be sponsored by Tuvu. Tuvu connects people, families, and communities on their values based social media platform. There's no ads, no explicit content, just fun. Check it out at tuvu.com. It costs taxpayers $7 billion each year to fund the Department of Education. And what do they get for that money? Well, schools do get a small amount of federal dollars for the privilege of being forced to comply with federal mandates, many with which they just don't agree. Sheri Few is on a mission to end the Department of Education. If you want to find out why, stay with us.
You know, I've never really felt comfortable sharing pictures of my kids on social media. Then I found Tuvu, a premium social app with an actual, authentic community. No bots, no one trolling me or my family. Just clean, wholesome content you can trust.
Welcome to the Moms for America podcast. Each week, special guests tackle the issues facing the moms of America today. Discussions include personal stories and advice on how moms can build a strong foundation of faith, family, and freedom in their homes and country. Well, hello, moms. I'm Debbie Curlitis, your host. I'm so glad that you are stopping by again another week here with the podcast right here at the top of the show. Besides welcoming you, I want to invite you to like, subscribe, and share. I also want to ask you to be a part of our movement if you haven't joined Moms for America. You might say, well, who is Moms for America? We're a national organization of moms, just about over 500,000 moms and growing. 20 years we've been around, and we are moms uniting all across our country to fight for faith, family, freedom, and the Constitution. We would love to have you a part of our tribe. We are the ultimate support group for you moms. Please check us out at momsforamerica.us. Join the movement. We have an incredible amount of resources that will empower and inspire you and educate you on what's happening in our culture and in our country. Also, if you have an idea for the podcast, would you please email me at podcast@momsforamerica.net. I would love to hear from you, get your feedback, and any suggested topics you may want to talk about here on the Moms for America podcast. Alrighty, well, on to today's program. Sheri Few is the founder and president of United States Parents Involved in Education. Their mission is to end the U.S. Department of Education, and with it, all of the federal education mandates. Sheri is nationally recognized as a leader on education policy, and she has spent the last several years exposing CRT, sexually explicit books, and DEI in education. This is going to be a great interview. All right. Well, welcome, Sheri. We're so glad to have you on the Moms for America podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy to be on. I'm a big fan of Moms for America. You guys have been around for a long time and have done great work.
Yeah, 20 years. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary. Can you believe it? It's like, wow, how time flies. But yeah, we're all on the same page. We are trying to figure out what's going on in this country for our kids, for their future, and for America. So thank you for all that you're doing. This is going to be a really insightful discussion, and something that I haven't really talked about, a lot. We've talked a lot about education, but you've really got some interesting spins on this, let alone a documentary to be coming further in this interview. So first of all, though, Ms. Sheri, would you tell us a little bit about your family? And we'd like to get to know everybody a little bit. Tell us about your tribe over there.
Absolutely. So I've been married it'll be 40 years this year to my wonderful husband, Marty. And I have 4 boys, all grown, and I have 3 grandchildren at this point. And we're hoping to have a few more along the way. But I'm just really blessed to have been able to I was a stay-at-home mother. I was able to do that, to stay home and raise my children. And unfortunately, they were in government schools. I think I would make a different choice today. And some of that may have even affected the thought process that some of them have today. But we'll be talking more about that. But we're a Christian family. We love the Lord. And I've been volunteering my time to research and work with education policy for about 25 years.
Well, look at that. You know, you say I was a stay-at-home mom, and boy, you never know where God's gonna take you later in your journey, but I think the best fighters and the best ones to talk about the home and children for sure is moms, and I tell you, we see moms all across the country doing amazing things just like you, and here, grandma out there fighting the fight, so thank you. This is gonna be very informative for our moms. Let's talk a little bit here, and congratulations to you over there. I mean, for all that you're doing and raising that family. It's a tough culture, but we're making it and we're fighting back. So let's talk about your advocacy. You talked about 20 years you've been fighting in South Carolina, correct? Is that correct? South Carolina there,
That's correct.
fighting over the sex education standards right there for 20 years. How did you originally get started and why?
Well, it was through the observations I made of my own children's curriculum. And
Mhm.
so there were the sex education standards that we fought, but even prior to that, there was I just was a very inquisitive mom, and I looked at the curriculum and the textbooks and helped
Right.
with homework and all of that. So I saw things in the curriculum, in the geography curriculum in particular. For some reason, geography is where they were really teaching history, and things about China and what a wonderful form of government they had, and things that were absolutely not true. And so my eighth grade son, I took aside and I said, "Son, I need you to know that this is not true." And so when I saw that they were blatantly lying about our country and other countries trying to glorify them when it should have been the opposite, I was very concerned. And
Yeah.
so then the sex education standards came along, and I was recruited by another mother. She was sort of my mentor in all of this. And she and I were effective in stopping these insidious sex education standards from being passed at our state board of education and replacing them with some better abstinence focused information.
Yeah.
So that's how we started South Carolina Parents Involved in Education. And that organization grew, and we're involved with all sorts of things. In 2010, we led the fight against the Common Core standards, which, that was a very active movement all across the country. Parents like those of us, like you and I, were
Yeah.
fighting that. And then in 2014, it's when we expanded into a national organization, United States Parents Involved in Education. And that was a direct result of having been frustrated with the outcome of the Common Core standards, because we worked for about 2 years on strong legislation to repeal those standards, and it only resulted in Common Core being rebranded. We were totally duped by the legislature.
Yeah.
So I talked to colleagues all around the country who had the same experience. And that's when we decided to band together as a national organization. And we adopted as our mission to close the U.S. Department of Education and end
Mhm.
all federal education mandates, because we understood that that's where the majority of the nefarious pedagogy originates. It
Yeah.
starts with the federal governments. It's incentivized with federal dollars. That's exactly what happened with Common Core. So
Mhm.
that's why we adopted that as our mission.
Yeah. Well, good for you. And boy, what a fight that is. Before we get into that more specifically, I kind of just want to touch on something that you just said. And this is happening obviously much more now. To tell your children that the school is teaching you lies, false information. I mean, that is really terrible, number one. And number two, now you have to warn your kids. You have to gird them up. If they're in public education, you have to have really major discussions with them. And geez, what you saw 20 years ago has only escalated now. Let's comment about that.
Oh yes, yes. It's on steroids today.
Yeah.
It is really unbelievable how blatantly false most
Yeah.
of the information in government schools is. I mean, and they are out and out lies. Like, to tell a child that they could be a sex opposite their biological sex. That's a lie. That
Yeah.
defies science. And this is what they're teaching children. They're lying about our country. They're teaching children to hate America
Yeah.
and to love other forms of government. And if we don't stop the liberal indoctrination of children in this country, we are going to lose our very freedom. And
Yeah.
that's what's at stake. So it's not just moms and dads that
Yeah.
need to be concerned about this. every freedom-loving American needs to understand what's at stake in
Right.
this battle for our children's minds.
Sure is, because they are rewriting history, and they are teaching the kids a whole new outlook on our world and our future, along with the indoctrination, which we're seeing at all levels. I know parents have woken up all across the country. The academic levels in students, and you touched on this earlier, have just declined so terribly. Um, you know, compared to other countries, America is just failing. Our education's failing on so many levels.
Yes. So academically, we're not effective whatsoever. With
Yeah.
the billions upon billions of dollars that we spend in this country
Unbelievable.
educating children, most states are an abysmal 30% proficient in reading and math. And they keep changing the measures so that it doesn't look so bad. So it's really far worse than we think and perceive by the way they keep changing the wording with semantics and things. But even the word proficient, they're now changing to mean to say something less uh, disgraceful. Actually, it's
Mm,
outright disgraceful that
it
children
is.
are not learning to read and write. They're learning all of these other things that are not healthy that will actually harm them, but academically, they are failing.
It is shocking that the educational system, and talk to a lot of teachers, we talk to a lot of folks involved in the education system, that they're just so fixated on changing. I guess it's just really embedded in the whole process. I mean, we're even, rewriting not only history, like you said, causing all of these problems in the school, but we're also redefining biology. I mean, it's I guess it doesn't shock you because you've been in this fight of how aggressive it is, and I guess really how much this was a part of their plan.
Yes, I think it has been a part of
Yeah.
their plan. And they've also been very patient and incremental over time as they have
Yes.
implemented their plan. So we've gotten to this place now to the breaking point, I believe. But it's been a long time in the making. I mean, we can go all the way back to Horace Mann and
Right.
the history behind education. When my children were in school, you would see glimmers of it as I've explained. And I would go to national education policy conferences every year in St. Louis, Missouri, and learn about all of these other egregious things that were happening that most people were not aware of. For example, the whole school to work push, and you may remember Goals 2000.
Mm.
But this was an attempt by the federal government to control the economy, and it's still happening. So our education system has become a workforce development system. So it's putting cogs in a machine, and they're manipulating children and their futures as early as fifth grade. They start deciding what career field they have, and the federal government is in charge of all of it and pulling all the strings to again try to control the economy. And it really is an outright disgrace, as I've
Mhm.
said before,
Yeah.
what has become of our government education system.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about this too. They have your kids a majority of your day, and if they beat that agenda and those thoughts and what they want to teach your kids, it becomes a part of that child's uh, worldview, which is the scary part, and that's why you have really made such a focus on the federal funding. So let's talk about the federal level, in the Department of Education. You just touched on a little bit of it, but I think we should all understand where this comes from, and really maybe can give us a little bit of history on the Department of Education. It sounds like such a good little thing. We want to help people learn, right? And this Department of Education has grown. It is not it's not as old as we would all guess. Tell us a little bit about the history of Department of Education so we understand best.
So the Department of Education was founded under President Carter. It was his baby,
Yeah,
and it
not
was
that long
only
ago.
in 1980. And
Mhm.
so since that time, the budget has just grown astronomically. Just for the Department of Ed alone, it's over $15 billion a year annually. So I've written extensively about how we could better use that money, paying down the debt for one, and just removing this unconstitutional barrier in our children's education, because that's what it's become. It is the federal government is all about controlling education, and they do that through the purse strings. So what most people don't understand when we talk about closing the Department of Ed and ending all federal education mandates, because there are mandates that come through
Mm-hmm.
laws and through other agencies that also affect the classroom. But in the scheme of things, what most people don't understand is that only about 10% on average of each state's education budget is derived from the federal government. So, yeah, 10% is not a large
Right.
percentage, something we think that states can begin to look at weaning themselves off of. So we have
10%, right, we would all assume that it's much higher as far as federal funding, but it's not, and like you said, I think this is why you feel like it's attainable to shut this down and regroup, so it was what was their thought when they created this? What was their plan?
Well, I think it was always their plan to control.
Yeah.
I don't think that that was, we had Republicans and Democrats have been so guilty about bad education policy. The Bushes were probably some of the worst when it came to education policy. No Child Left Behind, which was just a data grab, gathering data on students all over the country. And so, I really think that instinctively they want to control the classroom. They want to control the future. And, we've seen in other countries under dictators and other uh, bad regimes that that's how it's done. When they want to change a form of government or take over control, put a dictator in charge, they do it through the minds of children. So
Yeah.
I think it's always been a part of the plan. And I know I'm probably coming off as the tinfoil hat lady, but I was saying things like this 20 years ago, and now it's so obvious. Everything's come together, and they're not ashamed. They are unashamed of the
Yeah.
fact that that is their goal and their agenda.
Yeah, they are very, very bold. Let's talk about some of the federal mandates, the bad federal mandates that are destroying public education that come with the money. And a lot of times we have to say this, right? Follow the money. And these government departments, they start out small and they grow to huge, I almost call them just corporations. But what are some of the federal mandates that are destroying public education in your eyes that's attached to this money?
Okay, so of course, I've already mentioned Common Core as an
Right.
example. With Common Core, it was the race to the top grants, and they were competitive, and every state, wanted these big grants. And the only way that they could get the extra points in the scoring mechanism, which is what was necessary to win, was to adopt these standards. So before the standards were even fully written, the final copy had not even been produced. States were adopting these standards, and every state in the nation adopted them. Actually, there were about 4 states that didn't, but eventually they went on to do it. Florida now is the only state in the nation that does not have Common Core standards, and they've done that recently under Governor DeSantis, which I just have to mention that he has really set the bar high for the other states. He set the precedent, and he's fighting all of this nonsense in his state and doing it very effectively. So there's the Common Core standards. There is a couple of years ago, they threatened to withhold free and reduced lunch money from states if they didn't have gender neutral bathrooms. We used to call them unisex, but this word gender, we need to be careful because the word gender was created by the left, and it's always been sex, never gender. The scientific term is sex. So that was one of the mandates that was nefarious. And then more recently, it's the changes to the Title IX regulations.
Yeah.
So Title IX is a law that was created to protect women and women's sports. And
Right.
so they've rewritten the regulations related to that, and include now for discrimination factors, gender and sexual orientation. They want to classify those as discrimination potential categories. And if you don't comply with the new regulations, guess what? They're going to keep your money. That's the
Mhm.
threat. It's always the threat. We're going to withhold the federal funding. And the truth of the matter is, they have never withheld federal funding from schools. It has been a threat for the longest time. And it's only the only thing that they have done in the recent past was, I think it was when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor of Florida, California. He wouldn't comply with the standards, I think, the testing. And so what they ended up, they threatened to withhold the funding, but
Sure.
they only ended up withholding like $50,000 when it came down to it. It was a little fine, a little slap on the wrist. And so with the Title IX changes, I have encouraged, and many states have already, they didn't need my encouragement. They've already stepped out and said they've filed lawsuits. They said they're not going to comply. And I encourage that. And I think that they should absolutely refuse to comply with these regulations because they just need to call their bluff. They're not going to hold any money.
Okay, so you don't think they're holding money? That's good to know because that's what they do. They terrify everyone. The children won't be able to eat. They won't be able to get to school. The school's going to shut down. So if you don't take federal money, um, you don't have to follow the mandates, right? And so, um, what do you think the future of that is? Do you think schools and academics and all of this are going to get stronger, especially because of Title IX? I think that is really a very good example that you're talking about.
Well, I believe when states wean themselves off the federal funding
Okay.
and regain control of their classrooms,
Regain.
I believe that parents will have more accountability because it will be local. It's easier for a parent to affect the election of her governor than it is for someone for Congress. So obviously, the closer government is, the easier it is to maintain. And it needs to go even further than that. I mean, ultimately, we need to put parents and local communities back in control of education. Even states have overstepped their responsibility. They have duly elected officials on the local level that represent the parents in each community. And those are the people that need to be making decisions about the education in their communities.
Correct. And we saw this locally, and I know this all plays out in different ways, but even with COVID, if you didn't mask the kids, if you didn't do this, if you didn't do that, they threatened to take away the funding at the schools. So it's a game that they're known for playing. And I think a lot of people just fall for it.
That's right. And, you know, education has always been about money, if you think about it. And it's a huge money making industry. I
Mm,
mean, with curriculum and all the other programs that are funneled through the education system, there is a lot of money to be had. And the problem is there's never enough money. There's always more. They always have their hand out for more and more money. You know, we put billions more dollars into every state under COVID, and you know, I think they got comfortable with that money, and now they're feeling like their budgets have been cut when that was just a, you know, an extra dose of funding. But it is almost as though they're drunk on money, and it's
it's
just
big
that
business. It's big
it's what
business.
drives it. It's what drives all of the government education system.
Yeah. Let's talk about your blueprint to establish state control of education. I know you just hit on it a little bit, but really, we've got to get control down to the states. Like you said, then we can vote for our governors, our legislator, our legislation. Talk about state control of education.
Okay, so we published a blueprint last summer about how states can wean themselves off the federal dole. Because we started out, of course, wanting to close the Department of Ed. That's still our mission.
Right.
But when we adopted that mission, we had a different president in the White House, and we had control of Congress as far as conservatives go. And so it was, you know, a viable goal to lobby our congressmen for this type of an action on the federal level. But then when things changed, we lost control of Congress. We got Biden as our president. We understood that our efforts on the federal level would be moot. So we started to work more with the states and empowering parents to run for school board and all sorts of ways to try to regain local control. And that's when we came up with the idea of this blueprint, because we have a blueprint for how to close the Department of Ed, which I think is very important because so many people talk about doing it, candidates in particular. You know,
Yeah.
it's a lovely platform. It's an applause line for any candidate, and I've heard it so many times. But who's actually looked at how do you do that? How do you dismantle this behemoth? And so we developed that blueprint first, and then we followed with this blueprint for states to wean themselves off. So now we have a two-pronged approach. We've got the federal approach and we've got the state approach. So the blueprint explains to states. I think it breaks it down in very easy steps. And the first step is to, analyze your different sources of revenue and see where it's all coming from. The second step is probably the most important step, and that's a cost of compliance study. So what we believe they will find that if states do a thorough analysis of what it costs to comply with federal regulations, they will learn that 10% of funding that they're receiving maybe is only about 5% in actual value because of what it costs them to comply. So then when you
Let's talk about that because I think a lot of people don't realize that when the government or your state start mandating everything, then you've got to invest a lot of money to to make it plausible in your school, make it run, make it sufficient, right? I think we forget about that. Here's the mandate. Well, what does that mean? You've got to change all the bathrooms, or you've got to separate this, or you've got to have this kind of entrance. I mean, mandates come with a huge dollar sign. And I think this is a very important part for us to address.
Yes, it is very important. That's why I mentioned it's probably the most important step in the blueprint
Yeah.
because it does cost money to comply with mandates. The Title IX regulations that we were just talking about,
Yeah.
in the regulations themselves, they admit that it's going to cost at least $25 million over a period of time. And I'm sure that's a very modest number. But,
Sure.
but in order for them to implement all of these new regulations about discrimination in their schools and hold people accountable for things like using the right pronouns. I mean, they can actually be accused of discrimination if they don't use the child's proper pronouns. So in order to put all those police in place to monitor this and comply, it costs the schools money. And all of their regulations and mandates do. A lot of people have probably heard the term unfunded mandates, and
Yeah.
that's exactly what it is. So for a state to really look at how much it's cost to comply helps to shrink the value of the funding that's coming, so it becomes more and more feasible for the state to be able to wean themselves off.
Yeah.
So that's the second step. And then the third step is to look at replacing what the federal government is providing with your own state programs. So in some states, they already have done their own free and reduced lunch program because they believe they can do a better job and provide better quality food. So it's that has already happened. So the same thing would happen with other programs where states could, create their own programs, do it more efficiently and more effectively, and so that's the third step. And then finally, there would have to be a complete revenue shift in the funds that are going to pay for education in their state. And we've got a little plan in the back of our blueprint that talks about having an offset on your individual income tax returns so that you could deduct the amount of federal money that would go to the federal government that offsets the cost of those new programs in your state.
Yeah. The government's great at doing this. You must do all this and then go figure out how you're going to do it. And we'll give you a little bone, 10%, and it's going to cost you so much more to make all this pliable in your school. It's just crazy. You talked about on the campaign trail. I know Vivek talked a lot about the Department of Education closing it, but obviously President Trump talked a lot about his position on that. What were your thoughts on President Trump, and do you think he would have been able to do that?
Well, President Trump said he was going to do it the first time he ran. And recently he was on a news talk show, and I heard him say again that in fact he said he was going to do it immediately. It was going to be one of his first actions. And he says he would have done it previously if it hadn't been for COVID, that when COVID hit, it got in the way of a lot of the agenda that he had. So I can relate to that. I can see how that's
Mhm.
possible. And we are thrilled that he's going to make it a priority in
Yeah.
his next administration. So it'll be exciting. We're really hoping that we can get connected with some of his campaign people and put the blueprint in their hands. I mean, because we've already done the work and we think it's a good guide for them if they're serious about doing this.
Yeah, it is great. Thank you for your team working on all that. Because the process to dismantle a whole department, a government department. It, I mean, it doesn't. It sounds like it's doable. I mean, it almost sounds like this, impossible feat, but it's not.
It is absolutely possible. It will take serious political will and a
Sure.
little bit of time, but it can absolutely be done. And it would be a great start for our new president to establish his administration by deconstructing things that are unconstitutional, because that's just one of many agencies that's unconstitutional.
Yeah, well, God bless him. I know he's talked a lot about it, and it sounds amazing. I think and we all know this. Local is the best, and if we can just regain that, we did that with, with abortion. Just push this back down to the states. Let each state decide what is best for their state and their community, instead of Washington making these incredible sweeping decisions.
Yes, you're right. That's a great example. It is, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution gives states the authority to govern things, that are not from the federal government. They have the right to oppose these things that are forced down from the federal government. So, our country, unfortunately, has drifted so far from the Constitution.
Yeah.
But this would obviously be a step in the right direction toward amending those faulty steps away from the true governance of this country.
I know you're passionate about closing the Department of Education. If we don't, where do you think we're headed?
Well, I think that they are, as I said earlier, that's where the majority of the nefarious pedagogies originate. So the push is from the feds, and then you've got your national teachers unions and all these other trade associations, the libraries association, the teachers, there's all these other trade organizations that are right on board with all the federal government's push. And so, as I've said, if we don't stop it, then we're going to lose our very freedom in this country. I
Yeah.
mean, it's to the point now where people are just turning a blind eye to this gaslighting over, quote unquote, gender identity. And it's just absurd to me that people are tolerating this. And I think it's even a test, just like I believe the masking and the vaccine mandates was a test for this country. Are
100%.
you willing to stand up and fight for your rights, or are you going to roll over and do whatever the regime tells you to do? And that's exactly what happened during COVID. And we're being tested now. And so that's why it is encouraging to see so many parents and other freedom loving citizens saying enough is enough. We're drawing the line here, and you're not going to take the minds of our children.
Yeah. What's your message to our moms right now? Oh, actually, before we talk to the moms, I also want to mention, what about teacher unions with Department of Education? I mean, that's another whole connection that is so powerful.
It is. The teachers unions are extremely powerful, as I mentioned, with the trade organizations as well.
Yeah.
And that's what is so difficult to overcome when you're talking about, congressional legislation. Because even though the president says, or the, yes, he was former president, even though Trump says that he'd like to close the Department of Ed, he can't do it on his own. There has to be a law passed.
Mhm.
He can influence the Congress and do what he can to, encourage them to do it, but it has to come through Congress. So Congress is
Yeah.
heavily influenced by unions. There's
Yeah.
tons and tons of money that go into congressional campaigns from the teachers unions, and that's one of our biggest challenges, are the tons of money that the left seems to have that they funnel into these campaigns, which causes,
Yeah.
congressmen to vote in their favor.
So just mention that too. I know you said that it has to go through Congress. What would it look like to undo the Department of Education? What would that process be like?
Well, there was a law that created it. So we
Hmm.
would have to repeal that law. And then there are several other laws that were created, especially back in 2000. That's when Goals 2000 was enacted. And there were 3 federal laws passed that, developed this whole workforce development. So there are several laws that would have to be repealed in order to effectively close the Department of Ed and end all federal education mandates.
Yeah, it would take strong leadership. Exactly. So I believe President Trump could do it. So again, we always say this to everyone, elections have consequences. So if we don't get the right leadership in, we can't make change. And if we get the bad leadership in, they can make whatever change they want. So it is an uphill battle. But I do feel like there is really a lot of momentum in the country to take back the educational system. It has been hijacked.
Yes, it's been hijacked, and it is in such a bad state right now. And there's so many tentacles. It's really a challenge to even try to figure out
Yeah.
if it's redeemable. And
Right.
so that's actually the next project that we're working on. Our research committee is the ones that developed the two blueprints that I mentioned. And now they're working on a report addressing whether or not the government education system is redeemable.
And what do you think?
I think it's going to come out very negative. I think that we're beyond the tipping point. I think that there are so many things that are involved that are nefarious that it would be difficult to redeem. And that's why our organization doesn't recommend any parent have their child in government schools today. It is so toxic.
Yeah.
And your first line of defense as a parent is to protect your child. So if they're in the system, I know we're going to talk about the film in a little bit, but I'll encourage the moms who have kids in the system to watch the film that we developed, that we produced, that exposes how bad it is in the government schools. You've got to get your kids out. You've got to protect them. I love one of my other mentors is Alex Newman, and
Oh,
he's
yeah, we've had him on the podcast. Yeah, it's reminding me of some of the things that he said.
yeah. So he says, get them out like the building's on fire. I mean, it's that serious. There's great harm is happening to children in these schools. And so we're seeing a lot of public school exit. And so even in Florida, I read an article recently where some schools are going to be closing because parents are making other choices.
Yeah.
So, that's how bad it's become. And I hate to sound alarmist, but it's absolutely that bad. And that's why we think as more parents make other choices and pull their kids out, it could even collapse. And then we could maybe start over. But it needs to be non-governmental. Government is the problem. It's amazing to me that we ever trusted the government with the raising of our children, because that's exactly what we have done. We have allowed, and it was innocent in the beginning, but that's how it always begins. And then it's the frog in the water thing. And we're at the boiling point now.
Right. And government was never intended to do all of the things that it has taken on. To comment about that, I mean, when we talk about the government and what their role is not to teach our kids, to parent our kids.
Exactly. And, there's a term that came out of a letter in Congress. I'm blanking on the name of the letter. Oh, it's the Dear Hillary letter. Okay, so when Hillary, when Bill Clinton was elected president, a gentleman named Mark Tucker wrote a letter to Hillary Clinton, and he laid out this scheme. And there's a phrase that came from that letter, and it's in the congressional record. This letter, because it was it was thought to be so outrageous, they entered it in the correct congressional record, and it laid out the form of education we have today. And the term that came from that letter was cradle to grave. And so you've heard that term, I know, and that is their intention. I mean, they're collecting data on kids from zero. Okay, so that means in the womb all the way into the workforce. So it's this whole data collection scheme, and they're working as hard as they can to grab our children as young as they can, keep them as long as they can. They've got the pre-K, 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds, then after school programs and summer programs. So you might as well just say the government is raising my child if you're putting him in the system that amount of time.
Yeah. And they are serving the kids They're collecting all of the data mining on all of our kids, and it's not good. It is not good. So thank you for what this organization is doing. I know that you talked about your documentary. I'm going to go to a quick break here, Sheri, and when we return, we're going to get a chance to watch a little bit your trailer of your documentary that you produced, exposing the problems in education. So we will show some of that when we return in just a moment.
What kind of America do you want to leave future generations? What do you want America to look like for your children and your grandchildren? Our nation is at a crossroads, and it will be us, the mothers of America, who will determine the future of our country. What we teach and nurture in the hearts of our children and how we vote will make all the difference. If you love God, respect life, honor family, and cherish freedom, then use your voice and be heard. We teach these values in our home. Let's secure them with our vote.
Your average run-of-the-mill American has no idea that the UN has any influence in the classroom.
Hey,
Hi,
how
how's
are
it going?
you?
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too. I brought my book too, if you would sign it at
Oh,
some point
I'd
tonight.
very happy to, absolutely.
I honestly didn't believe half of what I read in that book until I went and fact-checked it myself.
So much of the education policy that has now completely infected our public school system is coming from Washington, D.C., and beyond that, from the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization.
What's your goal? What do you want for your child? Because the school's goal is different than what your goal is. The institution of school forms a wedge between the child and the parent. You might ask, how? Child comes home, says, Daddy, I don't understand this. Can you help me? The dad says, I've never seen this before. I can't help you. Can't even help a fourth grader with its fourth grade math homework. Stupid, dumb daddy.
The legislature might have repealed Common Core as a term, but they renamed it. So right now people think we don't have Common Core. We do, it's under a new name.
You're talking about the minds, the souls of your children. Don't play around with that.
I really just want to get parents involved and informed because I didn't know this stuff. That child is my child. God gave me that child. And for the government to think that it is their responsibility to take care of that child is just unimaginable.
All right, Sheri, hard hitting, very straightforward. Why did you decide to do this documentary? Obviously, you want to educate parents, but this obviously had been a pretty big lift for your team to do something like this. Very well done.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you recognizing it being a heavy lift.
Yeah.
Because it was. Our organization is unlike yours in the sense that we don't have a lot of paid staff. We have 2 part-time staff that work a total of 25 hours a week, I think, together combined. And so I'm a volunteer. Everybody in our organization are volunteers. We have 20 state chapters where we have volunteer leaders. And we had this vision. We just felt like it was urgent to educate people about what was happening in the government schools. And it started out with my recognition that people had never heard about this workforce development model of education and the government trying to control the economy. And I just wanted people to know and understand it. But then as we began producing the film, all of these other things hit, with the masking, the vaccine mandates, and critical race theory, and then this gender stuff, it all hit. And so that became like the majority of the focus of the film. So I mentioned earlier my faith, and, I really believe God gave me this vision for the film. And he was slow in providing the resources because we had to raise $150,000 to produce this film, but we just did it in a step of faith and raised a little along and along. So the money didn't come as quickly as I would have liked, but it's a good thing it didn't, because when all this other stuff exploded, then the direction of the film changed, and we were able to capture all the things that are current, that are just so outrageous. So it was a heavy lift. There were a lot of people that were even people like Freedom Project Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but
Mm.
they gave us like our first big donation of $10,000, and we were so thrilled. And then we had some of our board members that were able to afford large donations. My husband and I donated as much as we could. So it came together. We produced it. I do think it's excellent, and I might be a little biased, but I'm very thrilled with the outcome of the film. It's not your typical documentary that's just kind of dry and boring with a bunch of expertise. So we put a storyline in the film. It's a true story of my daughter-in-law who has she comes to work for me in the nonprofit organization, and I have some required reading of her so she can come up to speed with how things are. And so she goes through the film interviewing the authors of these books who are the experts. And it's an all-star cast. We have Alex Newman that we mentioned earlier. We've got Dr. Carol Swain. We have a clinical child psychologist, lots of big names and experts in these fields. And she interviews each of them and learns for herself how problematic the government education system is. And in the end, she decides to homeschool my grandchildren. So it's got a nice storyline, but it's got a big punch because it exposes all of these nefarious pedagogies that we're dealing with in government schools today.
Yeah, well, good for you. I just was going to mention this too. I just spoke at an event the other week, and one of the moms came up to me and was telling me that their school is now doing an emotional, it's called Emotions. And it's how to teach the kids to deal with their emotions and how to be tolerant and accepting and kind. And of course, they wrap all these things under that SEL umbrella, social emotional learning, which is which is another agenda. And I know you talk a lot about this in the film, just really how they're trying to get the hearts and the minds of the children in education. And I think the thing that's also scary for me, and again, my kids were in public school. I took my last one out. It was a little bit of a different, feel like it was a little bit of a different time, but again, still, their agendas were there. And you just, they trust their teachers. They trust the school. Why wouldn't they? We're sending them there.
Right. We teach our children, if we're good parents, to respect their elders
Right.
and authority. And when they go to school, that teacher is the elder and the one in authority.
Yeah.
So we've taught them to respect them and to believe them and appreciate them.
Yeah.
So, and another issue, I don't mean to get off. I know we're talking about the film, but there's a lot of talk about teacher shortages. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that good teachers are leaving in droves because
Absolutely.
they're not going to be this indoctrinator.
Yeah, that's not what they signed up for. I've talked to so many teachers that said, I signed up to teach kids a topic that I love and I'm passionate about, watch them grow in their learning. And all of a sudden they are becoming doctors and they have taken on a role that was just not at all what they were, let alone the classrooms aren't even safe for them. So it's
Right.
just, it couldn't be more of a hot mess, clearly. So I do want to let our moms know that they can watch this documentary for what, 10 days for a certain period of time. Tell us about that. This is great. Thank you.
Yes, yes. So when we were talking about doing the podcast, I offered. Actually, we did this about a year ago when the film first came out with Moms for America. We offered it for free for 10 days for them to watch, and so we're offering that same promotion now. And in a way of thanking you for providing us the opportunity to get this information out. The film was never about making money for our organization. We just want to get as many people educated as possible. So this opportunity, because ordinarily if you were to live stream it, it'd be $4. If you were to buy the DVD, it'd be 20 plus shipping would be 25. So rather than having to spend money on it, we're offering it for free to your moms for a 10-day period. And we'll be providing that link for you guys to provide to your moms.
Right. So that link is going to be in our description. We're also going to put it on the screen if you're watching. And we will also send this out to our newsletter, to our moms when we share this podcast. So this is exactly what we do here, Sheri. We empower moms. We give them the information. We talk about it because education is huge, obviously. I mean, we want to teach our kids to be smart and proficient and amazing young young kid, young leaders. And education is huge. I mean, we want them to grow up to be smart people, but not to be smart dumb people, right? That's how I feel. I feel like they try to make them smart, but they're really dumbing them down.
They are, exactly. I mean, there's been books written titled, dumbing down the American children, and it's been happening for a while. The whole dumbing down part, but it's ridiculous now. It's in the sewer.
Yeah. All right, Sheri, give us the website again where we can find out information and even get to know you guys a little bit more.
Okay, so our website is USPIE, that's USPI.org. So they can go there and join the movement. And when they do that, then they'll get periodic emails. We won't overload you with emails, but just pass along good information as it's happening, keep you up to speed on what's happening. And you can also find the film there, but the film also has its own website, which is truthandliesfilm.us. So that's truth and lie spelled out, AND, film.us.
All right. And hopefully, prayerfully, we'll be able to take down the Department of Education, restructure, give it back to the states, and get much more local control.
That's what our goal is. And we appreciate you helping us to further our mission.
All right. Well, God bless. Thank you, Sheri. Thank you to your team. We appreciate you all very much.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sheri. We so appreciate you coming by and discussing all this. What an insightful interview that was. And again, we have 10 days free of this documentary. The link is here below. It's either on the screen or in the description below. And also you can go to their website and find out more about their organization at uspie.org. So check them out over there. Moms for America, we also have another initiative that deals with education on a regular basis. It's with Dr. Kelly Coles, and we have Allie Legg on our team. They help with education on all levels. So please check all that out on momsforamerica.us, and you can get information about running for school board, if you are a school board member, education, homeschooling, everything related to education at Moms for America. Again, momsforamerica.us. So moms, thanks so much for joining us. We say this every week. Liberty begins at home. You are the greatest influencers in your children's lives. Don't forget that. You mamas, you are saving this country by raising the next generation of patriots. Stop by momsforamerica.us, sign up for our newsletter so we can communicate with you and keep you up to date on everything that we're doing to help save America and to protect our kids. All right, I say this every week. Let's keep changing our world one home at a time, and I will talk with you soon. God bless.